All right, so we're starting a new unit. It is dealing with equations and lines on graphs. Our focus for today is we're going to try and figure out how to know lengths of a horizontal and vertical line on a graph, and how to figure out the midpoint of a line segment, which is just a line with ends that doesn't go forever, either horizontal or vertical, or diagonal, sorry. So we have a line like this. If I have a graph, it's pretty easy to tell how long it is, right? You say, okay, well look, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 squares wide, so it's 4. So the width was 4. We need to come up with a better system than just counting squares, because sometimes we're not going to have the graph, we're just going to have information. So if I look at this one, again, we could use our counting method and say, okay, well that's 5, but I want to come up with a better way. So I know it starts at 1 and it ends at 6. I'm using the x values because we're trying to do horizontal distance. If it was an up and down arrow, we would use the y values. So if I look at 1 and 6 and I ask you to tell me how much is in between that, most of your brains can just say 5. But we need to be able to write that as a calculation, which some of you will have trouble with. We're trying to say what's the space in between. The other word for that is like what's the difference. And the math word for difference is subtract. So basically what we're doing is we're taking one end and subtracting the other end. Be careful, because if we did it backwards, 1 minus 6, it would give us negative 5, which doesn't make any sense. Okay, so you take the far number, the big number, the right side number, and you subtract the left side number. 1 minus 6 equals 5 gives us the answer. Let's look at one more. This one's tricky again because it has some negative numbers going on. So we started over here at negative 4 and ended at 3. So like we said, we're going to start with this number. So I'm going to do 3 minus negative 4. Be careful, we got a double negative, which makes sense because 3 plus 4 is equal to 7. And if we check, 7 across. Let's just do one more really quick. Let's over here. Okay, this is obviously 1, but let's just use the numbers like we said. Negative 4 minus negative 5. So it's negative 4 plus negative 5, or plus 5 gives us 1. So sometimes it's good to use logic to check, does my answer actually make sense? But it's really important to think, we always want to take like the second point and subtract the first point. So it's second minus first. Now, we're doing a vertical line, same kind of idea. Again, the second point or whatever, the one we're going to put first, is going to be the high up one, just like it was the far right one. And this is the first point. So we're going to do second minus first, which really means 2 minus negative 3, which gives us 5. Honestly, if you make a mistake, it's pretty easy to see, because if I did 2 minus 3, it would give me negative 1, which first of all doesn't really make sense, but I know the number should be bigger than both of the two numbers we used. And really, if you're not sure, you can check using your graph or draw a graph really quick. So, the last one I want to look at is this one. Okay, we have a diagonal line. I want to know the distance. I can't really count the squares because it doesn't go through the squares. Our method also doesn't work because the whole reason what we were doing before was we're saying, okay, we're going from here and here, we're using the x values because it's just moving horizontally or vertically. This is a problem because we moved horizontally and vertically. So we can't actually use our method, okay? We are going to do a strategy next class which talks about how to deal with these diagonal lines, but for right now, it doesn't work. We're only doing horizontal or vertical. Now I want to go over and talk about how to find midpoints. So let's go back to our first one. Okay. Again, if you get a picture, it's pretty easy to see what a midpoint is. And in case you're not sure, midpoint is literally the point in the middle of the line. That's exactly what it sounds like it should be. That's clearly the midpoint. But again, we want to come up with a way that we can figure out this number. Sorry, the pen was being weird. How we can figure out this number with numbers rather than just relying on a graph. So really what we're doing is we're saying it's the middle of these two values, so the number in the middle. So the only number I really care about here is the x values. So the x values were 0 and 4. How do you know what's in the middle? Well, I know it's 2, but how can we find that? So when we talk about middle, the math kind of term for this is average. Average means middle number, the number in between. So we're going to actually calculate the average. So average is total divided by number of numbers. So in this case, we only have two numbers. So it's 0 plus 4 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So that tells me the middle number is going to be 2. Let's look over here. It's going to be a little different. Okay, my numbers were 1 and 6. So again, I'm going to do 1 plus 6 divided by 2. That gives me 3.5. It's 7 divided by 2. And if you look on your graph, it makes sense. The middle would be right there, which is 3.5. This one, we have -4 and we have 3. Same kind of idea. I'm going to do -4 plus 3 divided by 2. That's going to give me -1 over 2, which is -0.5. And if we look at the graph, that's the middle, which is exactly what we said. So again, it's always the same thing. You add the 2 points and average them to find the middle. It's going to work the same way when we're dealing with vertical lines. Okay, we take the two numbers, 2 and -3. When we're adding for this average, it doesn't really matter the order because it doesn't matter which order you add numbers. When we divide this by 2, you get -0.5. And again, that's right there. So these are pretty straightforward. When it gets to diagonal, it's a little trickier. So what we're thinking is the midpoint, like I'm just going to eyeball it, looks like it's going to be about there. Okay? Let's think first, let's do the horizontal. Okay? If it was just a horizontal line, I want to know what's that number in the middle. So it was at -3 and it was at 4. So I'm going to do -3 plus, this is for our x, -3 plus 4 divided by 2. That gives me 0.5. So I know that is my x value. Now I'm going to do the vertical. So it started here, it ended here. We want to know the middle of that up and down movement. So same idea. I'm going to take the y values. I'm going to average them. So the y values were 1 up here and -2 down here divided by 2. So that's going to give me -0.5, which if we look at our graph, makes sense. So really, all that we're doing when we're doing diagonal lines is we're calculating the average for the x and we're calculating the average for the y, and those give us the coordinates. Okay? These numbers aren't obviously going to be the same every time, but the process is find the average. So just to recap, we had two things we learned about: how to find the lengths of lines. So to find the lengths, you subtract the two numbers you have. You take the big number, the right number, or the up number, and you subtract the smaller number, the left number, the negative number, whatever. And that's going to give you the middle point. The other thing we learned about was to find the midpoint of a diagonal line or any line. Okay, you average the two numbers. If it's a flat line, you only have to average one, obviously. Like if they were doing this point, we found it was 0.5, so that's the x value. The y value would be the same, it's still 3, because it's on the same line. If it's diagonal, we do the average for the x and the average for the y, and that gives us both coordinates. And that's it.